Those who pushed for Brexit will, quote, never be forgotten nor forgiven. The words of former British Conservative Prime Minister John Major on Tuesday. Brexit is less than 6 months away, and the UK government is no closer to agreeing an exit deal with the EU, despite another round of negotiations on Wednesday. A no-deal Brexit might astonishingly result in food and medicine shortages in the UK. So was the Brexit vote a huge mistake? And should it be undone? Joining me to debate this are Lord Andrew Adonis, former Labour cabinet minister under Tony Blair and a staunch opponent of Brexit, and returning to the show for the first time since the EU referendum campaign, Conservative member of the European Parliament and an evangelist for Brexit, Daniel Hannan. Thank you both for joining me on UpFront. Daniel, your Prime Minister and party leader Theresa May has often said Brexit means Brexit. But what does Brexit mean to you? What does it look like? We don't seem to actually have a clue, do we?
Well, Brexit means becoming again a sovereign country, so that we hire and fire the people who pass our laws, and so that UK law is supreme on our own soil. How you then negotiate your relations with the EU is, there's a range of views on that. My own view is that having recovered our sovereignty, we should have the closest relationship with the EU compatible with being an independent country. The EU is comprised of friends and allies of ours, so from every point of view, it is better to have an amicable, cordial working relationship with the EU, where we are, if you like, the friendliest country that is a non-member, blazing away for every other country that doesn't want to join.
And if non-membership means you can't get a deal, if you leave the EU without getting a deal, which looks increasingly likely, you're okay with that?
You've just got to ask this question. If any other potential trading partner had gone to the EU with the package that Theresa May was offering at Salzburg, if, say, Canada or Japan or any other potential trading partner had come along and said, we will unilaterally accept all of your physical goods standards, and we will continue to protect your security, and we promise to accept your rules on the environment and labour laws, and we will pay you for the privilege, the EU, we know how they would have reacted to that. They'd have said, quick, get them to sign before the idiots come to their senses. So the fact that they're not prepared to do that makes me wonder whether there is any readiness to do a deal on their side, and that's why I think it would be crazy not to prepare for a no-deal scenario.
Andrew, Adonis, do you want to respond?
Well, what's interesting is that Daniel, like many of the Brexiters, is now starting to blame the EU for the fact that we're Brexiting, because the problems that he's just described are to do with Brexit itself. He described one vision of Brexit, but there are 101 other visions of Brexit. He has said now that what the Prime Minister is trying to negotiate, which is leaving the customs union, leaving the single market and negotiating a very complex and difficult arrangement on Ireland to see that there isn't a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. He has said that, in his view, that's unacceptable. Well, that's one version of Brexit he doesn't like. He's put forward one that he does like. The truth is, 2 years ago when people voted in the referendum, they were voting with a whole load of different options for what leave might mean. Now that the chickens are coming home to roost, it's clear that it's not possible to deliver a Brexit that works. What Daniel is seeking to do is to write the history books and to blame the EU for it. Well, what I'm seeking to do, and those of us who are trying to hold the middle ground in the debate in England, is to do what I think is the right thing now, which is to put the issue back to the people and say, look, you clearly didn't vote for any of this. You didn't vote to be poorer. You didn't vote for chaos. You didn't vote for a government that's now talking about only 6 weeks of medical supplies and food stockpiling. You didn't vote for a hard border in Ireland that could bring back the troubles and the return of paramilitary activity in Northern Ireland. You didn't vote for any of these things. So the right thing is a people's vote, a second referendum, end this nightmare, and then we can get on with our lives without having to spend all our time talking about Brexit.
Or why not a fourth? Why don't we make it best of three? Why should we accept an argument for another referendum from people who, by definition, do not accept referendum results? I remember in the run-up to the first one, all of the people who are now demanding a second vote were loudest in insisting that that was the final decision, that there'd never be another go. John Major, Nick Clegg, Paddy Ashdown were all on air, on the record, saying there's never going to be another go at this. Think about what you're doing.
Daniel, let me just jump in there.
Voted for Brexit than have ever voted for anything.
Hold on, Andrew, one second. Daniel, I get your argument there about, where do you draw the line? But you yourself, having once referred to a second referendum movement as a doomsday cult not long ago, are now saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're so opposed to the UK staying in a customs union, which is what the Labour Party wants, that you would prefer a second referendum even to that. So even you're open to the idea of another referendum, as much as you're being snarky about it.
Because what would happen here is, if that were to be the case, we would have effectively had a group of MPs and peers who had frustrated the referendum result, who had deliberately gone for an unacceptable result with the overt aim of overturning it. So the biggest vote for anything in British history would have been overturned by our politicians. But it's worth just spending a moment on why that is such an appalling outcome and why the people who are pushing for it really know this. If Britain stays in the customs union as a non-member, we give Brussels 100% control of our trade policy with 0% input from us. And in fact, it's even worse than that. If you're in a customs union with the EU as a non-member, then whenever the EU does a trade deal with a third country, say the EU did a trade deal with India, Britain would have to match every concession made by the EU, but India, under WTO terms, under WTO rules, would only have to reciprocate vis-à-vis the EU, not vis-à-vis Britain. Now, I don't believe that any Remainer or Leaver can possibly think that that is a good outcome.
Yeah, I've got a question for Daniel then, because actually, as it happens, I agree with him. I'd much rather stay in the EU than have an arrangement where we're a kind of vassal state and obliged to implement
Andrew, how are you
trade and customs rules simply because they're decided by other people.
Another referendum.
I'm just about
Daniel's point is you cannot keep having referendum
I'm in
after
favour of
referendum.
it.
But where do you draw the line? Why can't Daniel ask for another referendum after yours?
I'm not talking about a referendum after a referendum. I'm talking about a referendum on whatever deal Theresa May comes back with, because we're actually faced with the actual reality of a cliff edge at the moment. We're not talking about a hypothetical situation. And actually, the great majority of the public now agree, polls show, that they should take that decision on whether or not we go over this cliff edge or whether we stop it and stay in the EU.
Andrew's point is, Daniel, that he wants a second referendum because now you've got something to vote on. Isn't the reality that you guys did this whole thing backwards? You did a vote on Brexit without knowing what it looks like, without doing the deal, without offering all these different proposals of customs unions, checkers, EEA, etc. Isn't the point that you did it backwards? So now, yeah, you do have to do a deal, especially when polls show that the majority of the public now don't support pulling out of the EU. They've switched, according to the latest polls.
Well, that's what the polls showed before the first one, right? And look how that worked out. I mean, first of all, a second referendum wouldn't solve anything because the majority of people would boycott it on the perfectly valid grounds that it invalidated all of the promises made in the first one. Because we were told repeatedly by the government, by the opposition, by all of the people now demanding a second vote, that that was a final decision, that there'd never be another go. So it would be absurd to legitimise people trying to undo the promise on which the first one was taken. Lord Adonis knows perfectly well what he's doing by demanding a second referendum. He is encouraging the EU, quite overtly in his case, to offer the worst possible deal in the hope of overturning it.
OK, let's put that to him. OK, you've made that point. Let's bring in Andrew. Andrew's been waiting to come in. Andrew, you're encouraging the EU not to give a deal so that you can get a second referendum, Daniel says.
No, that's absolutely absurd because if it doesn't go to a people's vote, Parliament still has to decide what to do with Theresa May's agreement. Theresa May doesn't have a majority in the House of Commons. So if what the EU is seeking to do was to game the decision, to give us the worst possible terms in the hope that they're rejected, they would do that anyway. The reason that I want a people's vote is that I think this issue is of such magnitude that it should go to the people because it started with the people with the referendum 2 years ago. But every time that Daniel opens his mouth, he says something very significant, which is at variance with what most of his colleagues say. I took him to be saying a moment ago that he thinks that people who voted to leave 2 years ago should boycott a referendum on the terms of Brexit. He said that there will be a mass boycott of the referendum. Could he answer the question? Is he calling for people who are in favour of leaving the EU to boycott a referendum and therefore to try and make democracy inoperable in Britain? Is that what he's saying?
What's making democracy inoperable is holding a referendum where the government sends a leaflet to every household in the land saying, whatever where you vote, we will implement your decision. I don't remember Lord Adonis or anyone else on the Remain side dissenting from that. When the Prime Minister of the time said, there is never going to be a second vote, make sure that you think about this one.
OK, let's get a quick answer, yes or no. Are you calling for a mass boycott or are you predicting one? Which one?
A second referendum would be utterly illegitimate. And I mean, I don't know what other people would do, but I would not vote in a second referendum because we just had a referendum.
So you are, would you encourage other people not to vote in a second referendum? Hold on, would you encourage other people not to vote in an illegitimate second referendum?
My own view is that if you're dealing with that situation where the British people have given a very clear mandate and the unelected peers And the elites then turn around and try and undo the biggest mandate that we've ever had for anything, that we should not play that game. We should just say, no, we've already voted. We're not having any more to do with it.
OK, Andrew, he answered your question. You answer mine now, Andrew. Surely you concede that another referendum which produced a stay-in vote would basically destroy a huge amount of trust in British politics from the people who voted to leave the EU in 2016. They would say, we went to vote in 2016, we were told that our vote would be respected, and now the good old politicians got together and basically cancelled out our democratic vote.
That's clearly an absurd proposition because the people can't betray the people. What will happen in this case is that having looked at the terms of Brexit, so it's actually a different question from the one 2 years ago, they'll have seen the terms of Brexit, they'll have seen that many of the things that Daniel Hannan told us would happen 2 years ago, because everything was going to be milk and honey when we did Brexit, they haven't happened, and they've reached a judgment. What is significant about this debate that we're having?
That's a ridiculous parallel. This would be like saying, have an election and then have another election before the new government has had a chance to be formed.
Hold on, they will do by the time we have the referendum, Daniel, because that's the whole purpose of having it, is that we actually see what Theresa May comes back from Brussels with, which will be the first time we've seen it, because 2.5 years after the last referendum, she still hasn't negotiated anything. When we actually see that, we, the people, then get the chance, not the elites you're talking about, we, the people, then get the chance to give our view on it.
Daniel, let me ask you this question, Daniel, because you came on this show in 2016 during the referendum campaign. You made the case very eloquently at the time for Brexit. Your side won the referendum. But clearly, if somebody had called for a second referendum a week afterwards, we would laugh them out of town. But given 2 years later, things haven't quite gone according to plan.
They started immediately.
But hold on, but where we are now... Well, Daniel, no, hold on, be fair. Where we are now, you know very well, we have reports from the National Farmers Union saying food might run out, doctors saying there might be a medicine shortage, the government saying we might have to deploy troops to the border. You know that this is not how it was supposed to go. There's no deal in sight. There might be a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, but those
let me finish my question.
Northern
Ireland was not debated in the referendum campaign the way it is now. There may be violence again in Northern Ireland, which 3/4 of English Conservative voters say they're fine with, as long as Brexit happens. Things have changed, Daniel. Surely you must concede that. You must be able to look back and say, this is not quite what we promised.
I think it is extraordinary chutzpah for people who immediately after the referendum started working to undermine it, started signalling to Brussels that they should hang tough and not concede anything. We had 3 senior British politicians writing an article this week in a German newspaper saying, don't concede anything to Theresa May because hang in there and we'll have a second referendum. So people who have spent the last 2 years attempting to undermine any kind of settlement now have the front to turn around and say, oh, it's not going very well, we'd better have a second vote. I think the public will see through that.
But it's not going well. Can you at least concede that much?
No, I'm absolutely confident that we will look back on Brexit as the right decision. The European project is like a conveyor belt going in an undesirable direction towards more centralisation, more integration, fiscal harmonisation, military union, and all the rest of it. Brexit was a decision to step off that conveyor belt. And within a few years, we'll look back and we'll wonder what took us so long.
And do you have confidence in your Prime Minister, a woman who did not support Brexit and has lost the confidence of a lot of Conservative MPs and voters? Do you have confidence in her to deliver that Brexit?
She won't deliver precisely the Brexit that I wanted, but I have no doubt that Brexit will still leave us better off than remaining would.
Andrew, Brexit's going to happen, isn't it? That's the reality. And shouldn't you get on board rather than trying to undermine it?
I think Daniel Hannan's on another planet if he thinks that people are going to look back and see this as anything other than a disaster. But we're a democracy. We still have the opportunity until next March to put an end to this nightmare. That's where the public is, and that's why I believe that the right course is a people's vote. And if there is a people's vote, then I think that Brexit will be overwhelmingly rejected when people see the terms.
What was the last one? A penguin's
and
vote?
realise that their jobs are in jeopardy, that they're going to be poorer, that there's the danger of renewal of paramilitary activity in Northern Ireland if there's a new border, and that our defence and our security are in jeopardy as well.
We'll have to leave it there. This story isn't going away, but Andrew Adonis, Daniel Hannan, thank you both for joining me on UpFront.